Hello, everyone. We'll be starting here in a minute. I'm going to ask you if you could change your name from Erica Caceres to your real name. That would be helpful, so we know who we're dealing with. We'll be starting here in a minute. I'm going to cover a few things here before we start. Want to welcome everybody to the community forum. Please keep your microphone muted during the conversation so we don't have any background noise, but keep your cameras on because it's always good to see we're dealing with real people. The forum's going to be recorded. It will be provided, a copy of the recording will be provided to everybody who's registered. It would also be on the Berks Community Foundation YouTube site, and we share it with our friends at BCTV. And I want to emphasize that the views expressed in today's forum do not necessarily reflect those of the Berks County Community Foundation. So welcome, everyone. Really pleased to have you join us today. Very interesting topic that we have, very timely topic, I think. Just recently, the Pennsylvania legislature created some commissions focusing on several issues related to basic education. They're evaluating school funding and the services that school districts offer. Governor Shapiro has proposed additional substantial increases in basic education funding in his budget, and major investments in school repairs and other things like student mental health, school safety, and special education. The Auditor General of Pennsylvania recently released a report talking about the need to reform the virtual charter school payment system. And of course, there's a few things happening in Washington, D.C. that could have an impact on education, namely ending the U.S. Department of Education. And it's not at all clear yet what's going to happen with those programs. So today we have two people who are going to lead us through a conversation about what the future of K-12 education in Berks County might look like. And I'm very pleased to welcome our two speakers. Dr. Sherri Smith is the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association of School Administrators, which is a professional organization that provides support and assistance to all school administrators in Pennsylvania. Prior to serving as a leader at PASA, she was a Deputy Secretary in the Pennsylvania Department of Education. And she also served as for 14 years as a superintendent of local school district, Lower Dolphin School District in the Harrisburg area. She served on the boards of several state and national education associations. PASA provides support for over 1,100, I get it right. I'm an old man, I can't do math well. Members, including district superintendents, intermediate unit executive directors, and charter school leaders. Our other speaker is Dr. Michelle Reichard-Huff, who is the Director of Early Childhood and Student Services at the Berks County Intermediate Unit, where she has worked for over 20 years, slightly over 20 years. The Office of Early Childhood and Student Services supports students and families across Berks County through programs like Head Start, preschool early learning, early intervention, and special education. Dr. Reichard-Huff has recently received a Distinguished Service Award from the Pennsylvania Association of Pupil Service Administrators, and she serves on the board for the Reading Area Community College. So we want to welcome these two experts who are going to lead us through this conversation today. And Sherri, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. Hopefully I can provide you some quality information and insights into what's happening on what we'll call just a very busy time in education in Pennsylvania. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. And I look forward to any additional questions you can have. And then we have my colleague and friend, Dr. Reichard-Huff, who will give you the Berks County tinge to all the things that I'm going to provide from the state level. So just need to confirm, do you see my screen? Okay, we're good to go. Thank you very much. So to start with, Dave talked about the fact that Pennsylvania has put together 2 commissions. And so I'll just give you a little briefing on that. They're both, I think, exciting commissions that can make a difference for us in education in Pennsylvania moving forward. So first of all, we have the Commonwealth Court ruling, and that's a call to action for funding equitable opportunities for all students in the Commonwealth. And then secondly, this is a commission, and I serve on this commission, so I have the opportunity to listen to the great work that's being put together from so many perspectives across the Commonwealth on, it's called the Commission on Education and Economic Competitiveness. And this was brought together by Act 55, and we'll talk about both of these on the next screens. So first of all, the Basic Education Funding Commission was a lawsuit that was brought forward in Pennsylvania by several districts and some organizations on the inequitable instructional opportunities for students across the Commonwealth, that our state funding was not equitable from state to state. From district to district. So the court case was decided about a year and a half ago, and the president, Judge Jubileer, ruled that the Pennsylvania system for funding public education was unconstitutional, and that there was a call to action for our Pennsylvania administration, the governor's office and such, as well as our General Assembly, to how we're going to fix that. So they put together gave the opportunity to the Basic Education Funding Commission, and they came up with a decision on January 11, 2024, on how they were going to fix the inequity in our districts across the Commonwealth. So how they did with that was through first of all, the basic education funding, and then they also have what's called an adequacy fund that they started funding last year, and they did their first, we'll call it the first installment last year. So first of all, the basic education funding is the biggest pot of dollars that districts get across the Commonwealth, and it funds all 500 school districts. And so what they did was, we have what's called a base. And the nice thing about a basic education funding base is that that's dollars that our school districts can absolutely count on. So one of the things that we look on for education funding is stability and that confidence that dollars are always going to be there. So having the dollars move, they went from a base that was set in 2014-15, a 5.6 billion. And what they did was they reset the base, first of all, in 23-24, that all of our districts would get that $7.8 billion every year. And that's distributed based on a formula again, but it's on, that remains a base. And they also changed some of the funding formulas. I don't want to get into that too much today. I think that might be too much in the weeds for this, but ask me questions later if you want. But what they did was they went with 3-year averages on poverty and stuff, because what was happening on the base of the dollars, they also have an amount of dollars on top of the base, which is called the new formula. Even though it's pretty old, they still call it the new formula. And the new formula distributes money based on poverty, based on your number of students in your school districts, and other factors. And one of the things that I will tell you that our school districts struggle with a little bit is that money in the new formula, because it's based on your specific amount of information. If you're a district where your number of students are dropping, or your poverty, or your students that are economically disadvantaged rises or lowers, it has a great impact on the amount of dollars that you get. So in other words, the pot of money that's above on that new formula, some districts could actually receive less state dollars under the basic education formula if they don't put enough new dollars into that every year for our district. So just a little background information on the BEF. On top of that, it was decided that $14,000 was about the dollar amount per student that would make it fair and equitable across districts. And so they looked at all the districts and they said, You know, do they have $14,000 that they're funding for their students, all their students? And if they're not, then they deserve some of the adequacy dollars. So there's 348 districts that receive adequacy dollars. And that adequacy gap that they saw when they ran those numbers is $4.5 billion is the gap for those 348 districts for us to backfill over about 8 years is what they had established through the Basic Education Funding Commission to get those districts, all districts, up to that $14,000 number. Okay. And then there was also one called a tax equity, and that one's a unique one. It was another one where our districts that were seeing taxing at the highest level for their local districts. And it's all based on the 500 districts. So if you were at the 90th percentile or higher of districts with your taxing for locals, then you can receive tax equity dollars from the state. And that was all part of that whole Commonwealth court case. It's really hard for me to touch this. All right. So here's the adequacy. And I pretty much touched base on this. They used the base numbers in 2021-22 for that 14,120. And again, 364 districts receive those dollars. There's the tax equity about the 90th percentile. And regardless of whether or not they have an adequacy gap, they get that 90th percentile. And there was 50 districts, by the way, who were identified to get those tax equity dollars. So that was one of the commission's work. And one of the things that has a huge impact on us with state funding here in Pennsylvania. This one to me is a whole lot more fun. It's not really about funding as much as it is programs and how we all come together for the best interest of our children across the Commonwealth. And so this was, again, a commission that was put together by Act 55. So what it does is it brings business leaders like labor and industry representatives, Pennsylvania Department of Representatives, and all the professional organizations like PASA and the intermediate units have a representative. And we get together as like 50 different representatives, and it includes early learning folks, higher education folks. It's a real distribution. And what we talk about is that picture of what it looks like for our children and how do we improve our system in Pennsylvania from birth to age 24 for our children in Pennsylvania. And how do we work together instead of many times competing with one another or really not having those conversations that looks at the best interest of our children here in Pennsylvania and building that economic competitiveness and preparedness of our students. And so what we did, we're now working in 4 different groups. The Foundations for Early Success is one group. I helped to lead the competency-based learning. So that's basically the K-12 group. We have then some high capacity educators, as you know. The lack of teachers and is an issue. So that is one of the things of how we get high capacity educators interested in education. And then we have another group that works on the current and future workforce needs. So we're at that right now, and we're putting now our vision together from all those groups because it can only be one vision. And our desire is that we're going to go out, we're going to do presentations all across the state on what our vision is and get everybody's input into it. And then we're going to take it for legislative action because, folks, what we really want is our legislators and our administrative staff and all of us to approve and to buy in to that like vision of how we move our schools and our educational processes forward. So that it connects well for economic competitiveness and healthiness here in Pennsylvania. It's an exciting conversation. So that kind of leads, those are the 2 commissions that are leading the work here in Pennsylvania, and we keep those in mind when we look at every year's budget. So I'm going to start by going over some of the budget things for you, and then Michelle, please jump in and give the perspective when needed. So first of all, the education appropriations that were provided by Governor Shapiro in February are what we're going to talk about now. So he put a $75 million proposed increase for BEF. He put $40 million proposed increase for special education funding. He added $526 million more increase to the adequacy and the tax equity investment of our students. You can see how that breaks down. 493 million adequacy, 32 million tax equity. Additionally, put $100 million for safety and mental health grants. That's a continuation of those grants. $125 million more dollars for school facilities, $14.5 million proposed increases for early intervention, $5.5 million increase in CTE funding, $20 million into CTC equipment grants. That's flat from last year, by the way. He did that, so that's not an increase. That's just a continuation. And he added an additional $20 million into the proposed student teacher stipends. Again, I'm trying to get all of our student teachers, when they're student teaching, to receive a $10,000 stipend, as many of them have to quit their jobs to be able to student teach. So again, trying to help support us in the issue of our not having enough teachers getting into the pipeline and into our schools. So when you look at that, and this is just an overall picture then of all those dollars I just talked about, and the increases to those line items for special education. As you can see, there's a ton of different buckets of which dollars come to us from our state for education funding. So I want to talk to you, though, about the ones that matter the most and where we're placing our advocacy efforts here as across the state. So the basic education funding, remember, again, funds all 500 school districts. When we put $75 million increase into, remember I talked to you about that top base where they put more dollars into it, that's distributed by a formula. So $75 million then added to $225 million that the governor put in, or the General Assembly put in last year. So we had $225 million increase this year. They put in $75 million, now it's $300 million. Remember what I told you is if we don't put enough dollars in that BEF, some of our districts are not going to do really well with only $75 million new dollars. Let's say they may have less students, or their poverty levels or whatever dropped a little bit in their areas, then they could actually get less dollars there. So we're advocating for more, the General Assembly to put more dollars on what Governor Shapiro proposed into that line item. As a matter of fact, coming out of the work of the commission for adequacy of our districts, they recommended that $200 million would be added every year. So we're advocating for more dollars in that, because we have, of our 500 districts, we do have some districts that are going to get no new dollars through the system. And we actually have a few that are going to get less this year if we only put in $75 million. Okay, let me move to the next screen here. Oops. Oh, I'm sorry, Michelle, I'll jump right over you.
Yeah.
There you are.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. So this slide really highlights the impact in Berks County specific to the basic education funding formula and how that plays out for each of our 18 school districts. So you'll see in the first column, the proposed student weighted distribution for 25-26. And then the second column, where it highlights the dollar difference, it shows you what that difference is from the 24-25 budget. So of the $75 million that's in that proposed increase, the initial estimates indicate that about $3.7 million will be attributed to Berks County schools. And you'll see with Reading School District really being the largest of our districts and serving the most students, they'll receive approximately $2 million of that $3.7 million funding. So we are in a position in Berks County where each of our districts will receive additional funding under the proposed model, but that range really does vary based on the differences that we see with our districts in Berks County. The range starts at $20,100, which is with our Brandywine Heights area school district, and then again with Reading being such a large size district and the different factors goes up to $2 million. So when you look at the third column on the screen, that kind of indicates for you what that percent difference is based on that dollar difference. And shows you really a comparison from 24-25 to 25-26. So that range shows that with Brandywine Heights, there's a 0.41% difference, whereas Muhlenberg School District has a 2.77% district. So again, great variability depending on how that formula really does play out for the districts with all of those different indicators and the complexity that goes through the BEF. One of the things just wanted to highlight is that half of our Berks County school districts show a percent difference of less than 1%. And just to give a bit of a comparison point, the average for the state right now is 0.92%. So hovering really kind of around that area for many of our districts. And districts with, and we are fortunate that we do not have a district that is going to show a decrease in their BEF allocation. As Dr. Smith mentioned, there are districts who do show those decreases. Additionally, while we're sharing this data today, it is important to note that the distributions are preliminary calculations and they could change based on additional data. So things such as the school's average daily membership, both in what public schools and charter schools show, the number of English language learners, and then current expenditures still need to be finalized and calculated into those projections for that allocation of that additional $75 million. So overall, increases for our districts, but definitely different weightings in terms of where we're seeing each of those 18 districts.
Thank you, Dr. Reichard-Huff. So one of the things also I think that we need to be aware of is that, remember, all these numbers are preliminary. This is off of the governor's proposed budget. It now goes to our members of General Assembly, and I know PASA as well as other educators, and I'm hoping all of you can share your voices with your legislators on, how these dollars affect your schools. But again, this is our number one funding stream in basic education funding. And again, with that $75 million only being placed in that, really, if you're not an adequacy district, you're going to get very little dollars when you're looking at these numbers. $20,000 increase for all the high costs of education anymore, and cost of living that we're seeing that schools also get affected by is not enough. So we really need to advocate for our General Assembly, and I know we've had lots of those discussions, and I think they're aware that $75 million new dollars in the basic education formula is not going to work really well for many of our districts. So moving on to special education. So special education, the governor proposed a $40 million increase. That's a 2.7 increase from 24-25 budget. Again, this is one that is very concerning. I'm going to share some charts with you that will explain to you why special education funding is always one of our top priorities, as the needs of our students and the number of our students that have special education need for instruction has grown across the Commonwealth. So this chart is awfully busy, but what you can see in the top corner on the far right is a $6 billion number. That's the cost of what special education is costing all of our districts across the Commonwealth this year. Know that those numbers have grown about $350 million a year is really what we're seeing as yearly increases of special education costs. What you see in blue is what the state department gives us every year for special education, which is $1 billion. And when you look at the orange line, that's what we get from IDA. That is the federal special education dollars that we receive from U.S. Department of Ed. And as you can see, that has not grown for years. We've received the same amount of money. I will tell you that it was always to be covering about 40% of the cost of special education for our districts. Even way back when I was a special education teacher, we were hearing that. And I won't tell you how many years ago that was, but know that those dollars have not grown accordingly. So when you put those together, when you put the state and the federal dollars together for special education, and that's the second line down from the top there, you can see that our cost of special education with the combined dollars between the state and the federal, we're only getting 22% of those costs. Those costs then are falling on districts to use either their basic education funding or unfortunately, at times having to raise local taxes to be able to support the increases of these special education costs. So as you can see, with $40 million increase, if we're increasing $350 million costs of special education across the Commonwealth, this is definitely one of our talking points where we appeal to our members of the General Assembly to please put more dollars towards special education in this formula. And one more thing just to tell you, districts across the Commonwealth benefit differently from their basic education and special education. When we look at some districts, putting more money in special education helps them more than putting more money in BEF and vice versa. So, using the money and putting it in both these buckets are really important so that we can impact those districts that benefit from those dollars the most. And now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Reichard-Huff to talk about Berks County.
Okay. So again, another chart with a snapshot of really what the proposed budget for special education funding looks like for Berks County. We have our 18 school districts listed, and what we anticipate based on this projection is about just over $61 million will be allocated to Berks County school districts specific to special education through this formula. And then looking at the $40 million proposed increase, we project that $2.1 million will be allocated across the 18 districts. Looking at this chart, though, one of the factors that jumps out is that we do have 2 districts who will have a decrease in their projected special education funding. So definitely something that we're keeping an eye on in terms of which factors are really playing into that change for the Hamburg area and Tulpehocken area school district in terms of its student populations, how students are served in those general special education calculations. Special education continues to be increasing population across Berks County as well as the Commonwealth. So looking at the dollars that are funneled through here, knowing the expenses can vary for different disability categories is really a key area that we've been looking at in terms of advocacy, not only in the state budget, but also with our federal legislators and elected officials as special education really is governed by the IDA, which is a federal law that then is supplemented by additional state laws and regulations. And as Dr. Smith highlighted those differences, the federal funding is even lower than what we're seeing from our state funding. So as with the basic education formula and those projections, just wanted to clarify that these numbers could change. One of the key factors missing in the calculation is the Act 16 student count, and those are to be updated this spring and should provide additional information about the number of students and their associated costs. This is an important factor when we're looking at special education costs because Act 16 provides categories for how students are identified and classified based on the costs that their services have for the district. So when we look at students who may receive one service, such as speech and language therapy, that cost may be much less than a student who needs 4 or 5 services, such as physical therapy, occupational therapy, a specialized classroom, specialized transportation. So one of the things that has been factored into the state allocation is how students in each district are allocated and what their driving costs are to ensure that there's a more equity in the dollars that are coming forth. So once that Act 16 data that's reported by the districts is finalized, we would anticipate more accurate calculations or projections, again, based on that $40 million increase that is still preliminary from what the governor's proposed budget has. To give just a little bit more information about special education and trends in Berks County, one of the important things to highlight, which is not specific to Berks County, but also the Commonwealth, what we're finding is that while our total enrollment in our public schools is decreasing, and that's true of our schools in Berks County, the total number of students requiring special education is increasing. And as of our December 1 count for 2024, there are 15,195 school-age students in Berks County identified as in need of special education services. And this is approximately a 1.8% increase from that December 1 count from 2023. So we're seeing a pretty steady increase in the county in terms of students being identified for special education needs and services. To give you a little bit of information just about what those needs and services may look like is from that 15,195 school-age students, the percentages on the slide really outline those top 5 disability categories that we're seeing in terms of student classifications. So specific learning disabilities, which really focuses in on students who are experiencing challenges in reading, math, or written expression, is our highest area of need. That's a higher incidence disability, and students receive really supplemental instruction within their school district programs. Other health impairments is a disability category that we see increasing. What we're finding, more students being identified with other health impairments under classifications such as attention deficit disorder, ADHD, or anxiety coming into school, where their ability to attend and participate due to health conditions or impairments is really impacting their education. And we're seeing more students being classified under that classification. And then wanted to just highlight coming in third in our percentages is autism. And over the past year, we've seen an increase of about 11% of students identified with autism in Berks County. Knowing that that number nationwide is increasing, we're seeing that same trend locally. And diversity across the autism spectrum. So we know that some students may receive a small number of services or less intense services, but we also have students then that really have required potentially out of district placements or more specialized or one-to-one services due to what their challenges really are or experience. So the range of special education really is challenging, which is why that Act 16 information and categories is helpful to really figure out what the costs of special education are across our districts and in Berks County. We anticipate, just looking at our preschool early intervention program in Berks County, those numbers will continue to increase for our K-12 schools as we are seeing that increase in autism with our students in that 3 to 5 population still coming into preschool early intervention. So this is definitely an area of advocacy, both at the state and federal level for Berks County in terms of adequate funding to meet the students' needs and ensure that they're able to access educational opportunities that really meet what those individualized needs are.
Thank you. And they need those services as early as possible, right? As young as possible. So money into our early intervention programs is really important. And just FYI, I just want to let you know, I heard a new statistic, and to me, it's a little concerning, but one birth out of 33 births are students with autism anymore. So those numbers are getting more and more prevalent. So I'm not sure we're going to see any of those numbers of students with needs decreasing coming into our early intervention for at least the years to come. Changing again, these are 2 other buckets of dollars. Again, remember, this one are the ones that came off the Commonwealth Court ruling and the response by our state leaders to address it. So it's the adequacy and the tax equity dollars. And they put those dollars into the Ready to Learn grants. Now you're probably saying, what are Ready to Learn grants? Well, to be honest with you, they bucket those dollars into a system. PDE, Pennsylvania Department of Education, oversees them, and you have to list how you're going to use those dollars. And the reason why the General Assembly bucketed those dollars into Ready to Learn is because there's some accountability for the districts to list how they're using those dollars. Remember, the court case was for equitable instructional opportunities for all students across the Commonwealth. So when you get adequacy dollars, you're supposed to be showing how those dollars are going to improve or increase the number of educational and instructional opportunities for our students across the Commonwealth. there's accountability for that. The tax equity dollars, interestingly, is again, those are in the Ready to Learn grant, and they're supposed to be used to how do you provide some support to your taxpayers because your tax rates are in the top 90 percentile or the top 10 percentile, I should say, in the state. And so they have some things that they need to fill out how they're using those dollars to offset local tax increases and such in their schools. So they put them in there, and as you can see, we've always had what's called a Ready to Learn Foundation dollars for years and years. I can remember them back when I was a superintendent. It was the same amount, $295 million. We could use those for different purposes in our schools. But now they started, you can see last year, giving us adequacy and tax equity dollars to address Commonwealth Court case. And last year, they gave us $493 million for adequacy, and they gave us $32 million for tax equity. So that ends up a total of $820 million is now in those Ready to Learn grants. Now, those dollars remain the same. You keep those dollars once you get them. And as you can see, the governor has proposed, again, the same amount of new dollars for our adequacy and tax equity for next year, which if the General Assembly and the governor sign off on this down the road, would make $1.35 billion then will run through the Ready to Learn grants. So again, these supplements are that the total $526 million. Now, what you need to understand is if you were an adequacy district last year, you're an adequacy district this year. The districts don't change because it's a static, right? At this point, we'll say that at this point, it is a static formula from 2022-23. And you were either identified as an adequacy district or not, based on that $14,120, which was seen as the per student cost. The same things with the equity districts. If you were an equity district last year, you're an equity district next year because it's a static number. So here's the new dollars that they're proposing on that. And now I'm going to turn it to my colleague who's going to share with you how this plays out for Berks County.
Hey, thank you. I think these slides are much more simplistic than the previous ones on BEF and SEF, but you'll see on the screen the districts that currently are designated as adequacy districts. So you'll see that 10 of our 18 school districts in Berks County do hold that designation and will receive adequacy dollars for 25-26. Thinking about Berks County, I think one of the challenges is exactly what Dr. Smith highlighted is it is static at this point, and how do other districts whose demographics or things may change have a gateway or a pathway to receive additional dollars that may mirror what is needed under adequacy. So we do have 8 districts who currently are not eligible that really receive their funding then through those other core components, as do another 150 districts in the Commonwealth who share that 3.3% of new funds that come through. So an area of concern that we watch, it does benefit the districts who are designated, but as demographics sometimes change in districts, it does become concerning that there is not kind of a reevaluation or another pathway to look at that from a year-to-year model. The next slide highlights the tax equity districts, which there are 3 in Berks County. This includes Antietam, Exeter Township, and Muhlenberg School District. And again, you'll see those proposed supplements for each of these districts. And this designation, again, is similar to the adequacy dollars, as there will be no additions of districts to receive those funds for the 25-26 school year based on the current processes. So pretty brief slides in terms of the impact, but those are the districts that do receive that additional RTL adequacy and equity funding, and there are several then that do not. So Dr. Smith, I will turn it back over to you.
Thank you. So let me just conclude that. So those are the major buckets of dollars from the governor's proposed budget. So here's part of our challenge, and Dr. Reichard-Huff kind of touched on it, is that if you're an adequacy district, the 348 districts, you also get, remember, because all 500 districts get the special education and the basic education funding too. So the 348 districts that get adequacy districts get 97% of the new dollars in the governor's budget. That leaves 152 districts that will get only 3% of the new dollars. So here's some of the concerns is that we need to put additional dollars into the basic education fund formula and the special education formula, because we can't do what the court case was trying to fix, right? Is that what we're going to do is flip-flop districts if we're not careful on who doesn't have equitable funding. Number one. Number two is a lay of caution is at this point, we don't know where the federal dollars are going to be for next year when a new budget comes out in September. And so our districts are going to need some cushion of dollars based on the fact that at the federal level in the September budget that may come out, we may have differences or less money coming into our districts through their federal Title I dollars. I don't think they're going to touch IDA dollars. I do think they're probably fairly safe, but I do hear some rumblings on Title I, Title II, Title III dollars, and other dollars from the federal government. So when you're looking at that, we have to look at or be prepared to take the impact of some loss of those fundings for next year. So know that that's part of our concern is thank you for the adequacy dollars. And again, know that those are all proposed numbers. Our General Assembly could maneuver some of those dollars out of adequacy, dump them into basic education. They do have the opportunity to make some decisions based on the data of how to best support our schools. So we'll jump off of that. We'll go on to a few other items that is in the governor's budget that I think would be interesting for this community to hear about. So the continuation of the universal free breakfast program. I really do appreciate that Governor Shapiro put this into place. Actually, I think Governor Wolf did before Governor Shapiro. We started it right after the pandemic, but this is a continuation of universal free breakfast program. So as we know, we have many students across this Commonwealth, to be honest with you, that are hungry. And so the fact that they provided and will continue to provide dollars into the universal free breakfast program, so every student in every district can have breakfast, I think is a wonderful contribution. So know that that's $109 million that will cost to continue that program for this year. I think it's important to see how many of those breakfasts were served in 2023-24, 90 million meals. Again, a real need, and you can see that's a 10% increase from the previous year. So the other thing that these dollars do is it helps students that do get reduced price lunches, not free, but reduced price lunches. They help to cover the cost of that, so those students get free lunches as well. Another program that's obviously very near and dear to all of us is our school health and safety of our students and our mental health. So what he proposed again was $100 million of funding that would go to our school safety. And what they did 2 years ago, there used to be two different buckets, and one was mental health, and there was one that was physical health. It was $100 million for the physical health and mental health, excuse me, and $50 million. And so not this year's proposed, but last year's budget, we moved to only $100 million, which to be honest with you, is a little sad to me, again, because there's nothing more important than the safety of our children. However, I do appreciate the fact that he put another $100 million into school safety grants again, and then districts can use that for mental health, or they can use it for physical health. They did put another $11 million in there. I always keep that in for people to know, but we're not sure what those targeted school safety grants are, so we can't really count on them for our schools. It may be for something different, but the $100 million, I would say, would probably be a pretty secure continuation from at the end of this budget year. Okay, there you go. There's Berks County's.
Thank you. So both school safety and mental and behavioral health have great support, and our districts have really a strong commitment to strengthening both our school safety practices and protocols, as well as the services and supports we're able to provide under mental and behavioral health services. So as Dr. Smith shared, with the money that used to be two separate budgets coming under one area. This is an area of attention that we've been looking at through our Committee on Legislative Action in terms of how can we leverage those funds most appropriately to support both areas now that that money is combined. So in the past, one of the slides we wanted to highlight today was just how Berks County school districts have utilized that mental health funding in the past. So you'll see on the slide, the percentages list out really the percentage of districts that utilized funds for specific needs. And some of those key areas in past PCCD funds specific to mental health have really been designated for direct counseling services for students, supporting the training and compensation of our school-based mental health professionals, implementing trauma-informed practices within the schools, and then investing in staff training specifically for those behavioral and mental health needs. So again, all 18 school districts have shown those investments and really are looking to have a foundation for a sustainable and multi-tiered mental health support in schools. One of the challenges is with the way that that money was combined, those designations shifted as new mandates also came forward over the past year in the school safety realm. So when we move forward in terms of looking at school safety, the school safety mandates from 2024 required that school districts employ one full-time trained school security personnel unless they applied for and were granted a waiver by the School Safety and Security Committee. And I'm using this just as one example as sometimes how new mandates can really have an impact on funding. So as this new mandate came forward and we were looking at the combination of the funds for mental health and school safety, what we really found was that we now had one bucket of money to meet either a mandate or to meet those needs for mental health services that were being planned under those two separate buckets of money. So we continue to look at that impact and what that does for each district in terms of how those funds under that combined grant can now be implemented. What we're concerned about is that with new mandates that are unfunded and that one bucket of money, the money could then be used simply to meet the mandate, and then programs that were in kind of that emerging or being built process may need to be revamped or lessened and not strengthened to the level that our districts are really looking at, where we're now choosing between mental health or school safety because they're not being looked at as two separate things when in truth, they really are two separate things and two different supports that students need. So this is an area when we look at our COLA group, our Committee on Legislative Action, that we try to gather data and feedback around in terms of what is the impact of that single funding stream in respect to how that really supports those two critical priorities. I think we all would agree that there is a need for that mental and behavioral health support, and there certainly is a need for those school security personnel and school safety measures that are being mandated. It's just a matter of how do we strategically utilize that funding that's now falling under one combined funding stream to ensure that we're adequately addressing those two key areas. So that just gives a little bit of insight in terms to the conversations that have been happening around this one specific area. Again, because our 18 districts really have a strong commitment to both of these areas to ensure a safe learning environment, both from that mental health lens as well as that physical security lens, because they do work together despite them being different factors and separate things. I think I've covered my items there. So I just wanted to make sure I covered all my little notes here, but Dr. Smith, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. So now we're going to move to another subject, school facilities. The governor put in a $25 million increase into the public school facility improvement grant program. So that will increase the overall amount to $125 million. 25 million of that 125 million goes to solar grant projects. Know that was something that was passed last year. So if districts are interested in solar panels and looking at that kind of alternative, for fuel and such, they can send in their grants and to public school facility group and get and have it looked at. The one thing that I will tell you with the competition is that's concerning, right? Because if all districts have needs, and we know one of the things that across Commonwealth, a lot of our districts have facility needs, whether they're environmental concerns for their students with asbestos and lead, and or whether it's just basic upgrades to our schools, lighting. They have no air conditioning in really hot buildings, or to be honest with you, many times our buildings are in serious disrepair across Commonwealth. So we appreciate the $25 million placed into this. But one of the things I would tell you that we continue to state is, look, we got to find a way to have funding for our schools so that all our students are going to healthy and well-lit environments for them to learn across the Commonwealth. And we know this is a huge issue across many of our districts across the Commonwealth. I'm sure there are many in Berks County that are in building projects and such, and we all know cost of construction and those types of things is very expensive right now. So again, we appreciate the $25 million that's put there. And they started this program last year, but know that these are competitive grants. It means that you can put in your grant, but it doesn't guarantee you that you'll get a portion of those dollars for your construction projects. One of the things that is near and dear to all of us anymore is our career and technical education. It's really wonderful to see that what we used to call our old VOTECs, our career and technical centers now. Really, we have so many students that are interested in moving in that direction. Again, that really falls under our Commission on Economic Competitiveness with some of the jobs and careers that our students can get through our CTCs. So they did put an additional $5.5 million into the CTC line that will go into basic subsidy for our CTCs. Know that a lot of our dollars for our CTCs are paid through the supporting districts that send those students to CTCs. So hopefully with these additional subsidy dollars going to our CTCs, that holds down increased costs of our districts when they send their students for our CTC programs. And just an FYI, some of our CTE programs, that's the educational programs, are actually in our districts, and our districts host those. So we continue to grow in this area, and it's a great movement forward for us with our students. Okay, so here's another part that Dave asked us to talk about is the cyber charter school tuition reform. This is something that for 26 years we have a charter law, and like anything else, it's something that you really ought to review and update as necessary. And truly, the funding aspect of our charter school law needs to have some reform. We share you some information with you to kind of set the precedent on that. But when you're looking at 5 of the largest cyber charter schools with their revenues, expenditures, and fund balances, I just want to share with you, if you look at the fund balance from 2020 to 2023, you see they went from $254 million. And remember, this are 5 cyber schools, $254 million in their fund balance to $618 million in their fund balances in 23. So that's 144% increase in that time frame. What's that telling us? Well, that's telling us that we're sending way too much money from them. And remember, the cyber charter tuition rates come from each of our districts. When a student enrolls in a cyber charter school, the tuition is paid by the school district, and there's a different tuition rate for special education students that have an impact on our schools. So let me share some more of that data with you. So our General Assembly, our legislators did address this last year, and we are very appreciative. It was a good step forward. So know that the old charter law used to say that every school district had 16% of their students with special education needs. Well, why is that important? Well, the formula for the tuition rate that each district pays, and by the way, it's different for every district how much they pay. So it was dependent on using a device, the division number of the percent of students that you had in special education. So know that we have some districts across the Commonwealth that have over 30% of their students that have special education identifications. So when you're using 16% as your divisor, you're paying a whole lot more for those students than what your actual percent of students are of special education in your districts. So last year, the General Assembly basically passed that if you had, you could use your actual ADMs as students with special education instead of the 16%. If you were less than the 16%, you can still use the 16%. Now, this went into place in January this year. They didn't start it at the beginning of this past school year. They started it in January. And when they started in January, it was estimated that across the state, that would save about $34.5 million for our districts for the amount of money that we were sending to cyber charter schools for the cost of special education students. So that was last year and a good first step. What the governor proposed this year is a cyber charter school tuition of $8,000 per student. Okay, right now we have a range from about 8,000 to 22,000, depending on which district you're sending a student in that pays for those tuitions. So instead of every district's being different on a different thing, what the governor has proposed, and we support, is that it would be $8,000 per student that goes, no matter which district you're coming from, because why would it be different? It's the same education, no matter which schools you're in, what school you're coming from for our cybers. Know that the one thing I will tell you, you can see what the estimated savings would be about $378 million for our schools across the Pennsylvania. One of the things I will tell you is, as this goes into discussion with our General Assembly, is we're not going to land on $8,000. To be honest with you, there'll be different dollars talked about on how what that tuition rate would be. But we really are looking forward for a fair and equitable number for what the cost of cyber charter students cost should be, instead of varying from district to district. Not one that continues to be taking our local taxpayers' dollars and putting them into the huge fund balances of these cyber charter schools across the Commonwealth. That's unnecessary, and we're obviously overpaying them. Passing it over to you, Dr. Michelle.
Thank you. So when we look at what's currently proposed for the cyber charter school reform and the general impact in Berks County, you'll see some totals here on the slide, depending on whether we're looking at non-special education students, special education students, and then that kind of net or total potential savings. But you can see for non-special education students, we're looking at approximately $9.7 million of funding that could go back to Berks County schools. And when we look at that, we think about how these funds could be reinvested into our local classrooms, additional teaching positions, or support services for students. Additionally, looking at students who do receive special education, that we're looking at another $4.9 million rounding up for our districts, and then a total of $14.5 million that could be reinvested in the public school settings just by having an $8,000 tuition rate set for the cyber charters. So even if that $8,000 is adjusted to $10,000, there still would be a significant savings and money to reinvest within Berks County schools to really supplement some of those areas for special education or even the mental health needs or additional instructional positions to support the overall student population, because right now that money is really being funneled out of districts to serve students in those cyber charters without any district oversight because they're run as separate entities. So really advocating in Berks County for this specific change to happen, and within reason, looking at a tuition rate that is above $8,000. Again, as I shared, that $10,000 mark would still yield a pretty significant savings. And I know this is an area across our 18 school districts that many have been talking about and looking forward to what the result is in terms of ensuring we have voices at the table to advocate for this reform that would control those costs and make them, again, more predictable too for our districts year to year. So I think that concludes the comments for Berks County and that overall cyber charter reform. There are specific data points on the PDE website under the governor's budget proposal that would show that impact for each district. But because that really is driven by the different enrollment numbers, didn't list them here, really just wanted to look overall at that reform for Berks County and how we could reinvest in schools.
Thank you. So
Yeah,
just
thank you.
some closing remarks on that. So one of the things that we talk with our legislators about, number one, is, I mean, we need to fix that, right? So as you talk about equitable funding across school districts, we also need to look at equitable funding for our students that are taught virtually. And to be honest with you, the costs are not the same, right? You don't have buildings and facility costs and transportation costs that our schools carry. So we really need to adjust the rates and pay our cyber charter schools the cost of what it actually costs to educate our students without impacting our local taxpayers, and allowing those dollars to stay in our districts and to support them. It's a way for, to be honest with you, our General Assembly to bring dollars back to our school districts without needing additional funds, because it's a redistribution of the dollars from a state level. So certainly one of the things that I think we're advocating strongly for across the state, and as we move forward in this next year. And another thing, just an FYI, again, fixing this and bringing some of those cyber chartered overpayments from our districts back to our districts will help support them based on any federal changes, again, that might come. So, you know, that helps to provide that cushion for our districts, because we don't know what the impacts are going to be with the loss of any federal dollars moving forward. So that's our formal part of the presentation for all of you. So here's our contact information. But I will, Dave, drop the screen and I think hand it back to you.
Thank you. A lot of information, an awful lot of information. And I think we've got some good questions and comments. I'm going to sort of wade through these. I'm going to save the first question that was asked for the very end, but go back to some of the earlier things. What causes or has caused the increase in autism? Is it just more people are being diagnosed because we're doing a better job, more sophisticated job of it? Or is it an actual increase in the population? I mean, 20 years ago, nobody had autism.
You know, this is a question that is asked time and time again. And I think depending on the research you do, you can find some different answers. I can speak to my experience entering the field 20 years ago. My background is as a school psychologist, so that was part of my key responsibilities when I joined the BCIU team. One of the things is I think there is a true increase in the prevalence of autism and what we're seeing in our youth today. Looking at the students, one of the speculations have been with students who have a milder form of autism or potentially considered more having the deficits in the social lens is why we're seeing a spike in autism. But we're also seeing an increase in students who have those more complex needs, maybe nonverbal, have more challenges. So that population over years, we have seen increase, which kind of signals that increased prevalence. However, there have been changes in the diagnostic criteria too that allow for those diagnoses for more of those social needs and what are considered or used to be considered milder forms of autism. That language has somewhat moved away from the autism community. So there are definitely a change in that diagnostic criteria has contributed to that increase. Also, the increased awareness of autism over the years, I think, has had individuals actually go out to seek that diagnosis, kind of reflecting even as adults that that's potentially a diagnosis that was missed earlier in their youth and now are seeing some of the challenges they experience as adults in terms of being diagnosed or at least recognizing that classification and the struggles were more associated with a developmental disability than just social challenges that students may have had in schools. So Policy changes also could have contributed to some of the increase that we're seeing because of the diagnostic criteria and how students receive services, whether that's through special education or mental health. Whatever that criteria looks like for accessing the services sometimes could contribute to how students are being classified versus using a traditional DSM diagnosis that we would have used back in the 90s. So multiple factors. It's not a clear answer, and depending on the researcher or individual you follow, you could see a lot of different things about environmental factors or other things in the environment that could be contributing to that as well.
Sure, I think you mentioned Title I, Title II, and Title III in the federal government. Could you explain a little bit more about what they are?
Sure, they're the different, again, we'll call them buckets. They're different buckets of dollars paid through from the feds to our schools, and it's distributed. A lot of it is distributed based on your level of economic disadvantage. So Title I dollars, for instance, can be used for programs such as, I always used it for my reading specialists, my reading programs. I used it for targeted support of students in reading in kindergarten for 3 as a superintendent. But Title I dollars really kind of, your amount of dollars that you get is really based on that, but that's for instructional programs and supports of students based on basically reading and your basic skills. The Title II dollars is basically for professional development and for class size reduction is where those dollars were for Title II. And I would tell you that Title II is where I think, because it's set under a different kind of responsibility and oversight at the feds level, is that I do think that those dollars are greatest at risk. They're seen as more discretionary dollars. So it's the Title II dollars that I think we may even see a little bit of a reduction this year. So, but it goes for professional development and class size reduction. Title III dollars is really for our migrant education and our programs that are students for ESL. And so that program, I think, again, is at high risk for dollars. Now, that one's a smaller one than the Title II, which is smaller than the Title I. The Title I is a big bucket of dollars for many of our schools. Losing Title II would not be devastating for some of our districts. There could be hundreds of thousands of dollars that they're losing, but the Title I is can be pretty big. Now, what I'm hearing is that Title I is fairly safe. It would need legislative action for that one to be reduced at the federal level. But the Title II and III, there's more discretion to that, and ones that I think may be higher at risk at this point in time.
How much do you have any idea how much money school districts in Pennsylvania or school districts in Berks County are receiving from the federal government for special education, early childhood, and ESL programs? Is it a significant percentage that could be maybe at risk?
So any loss of dollars is difficult for our districts, right? Our costs continue just to go up. So know that it puts us at risk. And again, it really depends on your district and the demographics in your district. And so on how those dollars are distributed as to how devastating it would be. I would tell you, if you have a high level of poverty or economically disadvantaged students in your district, the loss of those dollars is going to be huge for them and not sustainable. We're talking about millions of dollars. So again, I can get you those numbers. I don't have them in front of me, and I don't want to misquote them. But know that, again, it's not obviously as much as the state dollars are provided to us, right? Know that it doesn't have the same, even close to the same amount of impact that our state funding is for us. But again, federal level, it's still something that we've always counted on as being sustainable and predictable. And I think that's the part that's concerning for all of us. There have been rumored back and forth a little bit that we may look at a 25% cut of Title I dollars, or the way they distribute those Title I dollars may be different moving forward. But those are all rumors, and we can't base anything on that until we really hear what the next budget year would be. We do know that one of the things that we've had confirmed is those dollars are solid for this year. So we're not looking at any reductions in those areas.
Okay, good. Michelle, how has the combined mental health and safety fund affected school districts' delivery of mental health services here in Berks County? Have you seen a notice and shift?
Yeah. Over the past year, with the mental health funding that we were initially receiving in the two buckets, I think districts had plans as to how they would allocate their school safety money and how they would allocate the mental health money. So I don't think there's been significant shifts or decreases in services based on how that was planned. I think our schools are looking very strategically at how the dollars will be spent as new mandates are added to school safety or provision of services, knowing that money is combined, and then the new mandates, if they're going to hire a full-time school security personnel, that may need a shift in their budget in terms of potentially counseling services that were being paid for by that same bucket of money may need to be shifted somewhere else or may not be sustainable for their district. So while I don't see that there's been a decrease in services, I think what the caution is how do we strategically plan for services with a bucket of money that's combined for two things where additional mandates may be layered on that will drive what those costs are. And it's really a matter of that sustainability and keeping a watchful eye that the services you do put in place are not services then that you need to pull back or cut later on because that funding changes or new mandates are then being in order to meet compliance, you're using those for school safety versus the mental health services that aren't necessarily as regulated. So currently, I think we are status quo in Berks County. There may be district outliers that had to make tougher decisions with that shift in funding. But I know that we are pretty creative in how we share resources and utilize our community resources to increase the mental health services in schools for students.
Berks County, I think virtually every school district in Berks County has ESL students. In some cases, the population of ESL students is pretty significant. Is there any proposal to increase the funding for ESL in particular?
There's really not a separate funding stream for that. Okay. So
Right.
know that would be something that folks could use their adequacy dollars for. They could use their basic education increases for, but there's really not a separate bucket for that other than, Title III supported some support, some programs for that, which again was federal and may be going away.
You talked about the proposed changes in the cyber charter schools. There have also been some questions and challenges about payment for in-person charter schools. Is that on the table anywhere?
It's a really good question. So, the charter law was developed that was inclusive of cyber charter. So it was brick and mortar schools and cyber charter. So the tuition rate was established for both. And again, we're going to go back to the conversation is they're very different. What it costs for your district. So a good question to ask your districts is what do you pay for your district virtual school for students? I can tell you when I used to run costs at Lower Dauphin when I had cyber charter, not cyber charter, but cyber students, virtual students through our own program, it cost about $5,500 and that was inclusive of their equipment and everything. It's very different funding a student that's learning virtually as well as funding a student who's taught in brick and mortar. So it was made a decision because every time they tried to look at looking at actual tuition rates and such for virtual students versus the brick and mortar students, I think they found it better to separate the two to address it. And so they're addressing the cyber charter because that has an effect on all 500 districts. Brick and mortars, there's really, not an equitable distribution of them across the Commonwealth. So it affects different areas differently. And honestly, some districts don't even have a brick and mortar charter in their region. So they're taking care of the cyber first. However, that being stated I do think the next step would be for them to take a look at the brick and mortar charters if they can fix the tuition rates for the cyber charters this year. But it definitely, I think, increased the ability to have the conversation, and it made a whole lot more sense to kind of divide the two and to conquer one of them at a time.
So is a cyber charter school tuition rate different from the in-person charter school tuition rate?
No, not right now. No, it's absolutely the same. Mhm.
Okay, and that tuition rate is based on what each school district is spending to educate a child, including all the services that the school district offers? Whether the charter schools offering those services or not?
Yeah, it's on their proposed budget, right? So your proposed budget every year is where they pull what the cost would be, and it's inclusive of all your costs, which again, that's what, elevates those dollars sometimes for that tuition rate, is because it, involves things or includes things that, again, when you're a virtual student aren't really the cost when you're looking at buildings and those types of things included in those tuition rates. And just to give you an idea of how various they are, I did pull up the numbers because I wanted to make sure that I could tell you that. So for 24-25, we go across this Commonwealth from a cost of $7,700. One of our districts pays up to $29,000 for each cyber charter student in that district. We also, for special education costs, once they're identified for special education, and here's the deal, they could be a speech and language student who gets a speech and language person come on 15 minutes once a week, but there's just a general same rate for that district to pay on tuition, and those tuition rates range in Pennsylvania from $18,600 to $63,000.
63, wow.
$63,000 for any student that they identify as special education or is identified as special education by a cyber charter. And that's why it has to be fixed. It's not, obviously, it's overpayment, and it's just not, we know what a speech and language child costs in our districts to educate them. It's just doesn't make any sense that some of our districts are paying $63,000 for a student that may be getting speech and language services once a week in a cyber charter. It needs to be obviously looked at and fixed.
Yeah. We had a question that I'm going to ask another member of the Berks IU to join the conversation. Does the IU still run an online school for school districts? How's it utilized? What does it cost? And how does that compare with the cyber charter schools? So Mr. Richards, are you still with us?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, I can address that one as it runs out of my office at the BCIU. We do still offer that cyber alternative option. Most of our districts have their own option at this point, but for those districts that choose, they can work it through us, and we manage the program for them. That's for part-time students, full-time students, summer school students. So we offer, the gamut of options for those programs. In terms of cost, when you look at the numbers that were just shared, for Berks Online Learning, and I think for most of our districts, we're offering those services for general education students probably at 50% or less of what that cost actually is. When you start looking at special ed cases, that savings would be based on what those actual services are. But specifically, it would be paying for the services that those students need, not a general number that is just the overarching number. So again, I think all of our districts actually have those options, and/or we are facilitating that option for them. So across our county, those are provided.
Do we have any data about who's in the percentage of students or the number of students who are in Berks County school districts who are enrolled in cyber charter schools? Is it pretty well spread out evenly across the IU, or is it located more specifically in some particular school districts. Do we know that? Sorry, Michelle.
No, I'm
Dumped the
pausing
question
because I'm
on you.
trying to think. I don't know where that data is, but it doesn't mean we can't find it. So,
Okay, well, it
Dr.
came up
Richard,
as a
yeah.
it came up as a question.
Yeah.
So we are not entirely to the end, but getting close to the end. Dr. Smith, Dr. Reichard-Huff, what can we do to help encourage people to do the sorts of things that you're trying to get them to do here with the school districts and the school funding?
I'll start from a state level and then I'll turn it over to Michelle to talk about it at a local level, right? So, yeah, so statewide, one of the things we've done is we've talked about all of our superintendents that unfortunately our jobs have, I think, changed, and we need to be strong advocates for our students with conversations with our legislators. So one of the things I can tell you from a state level, and I spend a lot of time at the Capitol and with our colleagues, both our representatives and senators. And, we have good conversations about the impacts of their decisions on funding on our schools. But all the time, what I hear from them, whether I was the deputy secretary or sitting in this position, is that's great, Dr. Smith. However, how does that affect my local districts? What's the impact on my districts on these decisions? And so one of the things that we've done is we've developed some templates for like cyber charter reimbursements and costs, and one on the governor's budget. And we've sent that out to all of our superintendents, all our members, and say, you need to fill these out for your districts. And you need to sit down with your legislators and share with them the decisions that they're making and the impacts that that has on the regions of the state that they represent. So they know locally what the impacts of the decisions are for them. And I can tell you, I think we're doing a great job. I think our school leaders are really starting to increase those relationships. I already know without a doubt, Dr. Hackman and her team has a fabulous relationship with their legislators. And I just got to get the rest of the state doing the same thing, to be honest with you, that Berks County does. And we're getting there. But it's really important for all of us, I think, to have those conversations. I think it's really important for our school leaders to share those impacts with their boards and with their communities, because let's face it, what comes out of our state budget every year, what comes from us federally, has a significant impact on what we can do and how we can help our students in our schools so that they get a quality education in a safe environment. And I think that should be a goal of all of ours. So, I know legislators make decisions based on who they hear from the most and who has that impact and who can educate them on what the decisions that they make have on our schools. And they have a lot to do. And so I think it behooves us all to have those conversations and help them understand how their decisions are impacting their districts.
Michelle, you want to add anything?
Just want to echo Dr. Smith's words. We do have wonderful relationships with our elected officials here in Berks County and regularly discuss with them the areas that we discussed today in terms of funding, the cyber charter reform, our mental health and school safety funding. I think it's just important for our community stakeholders to also use your voice in support of public education, because I have always received questions and great insight from our elected officials, and know they would be willing to engage in those conversations with the full community and their constituents. One of the resources that is helpful is through our paschoolswork.org website, which actually does put together specific school district fact sheets and gives information if individuals are looking for specific districts you may live in or may serve in, and how all of these different budget factors impact that specific district. So it really would drill down on where you are in the county and what those different funding streams have. I think mostly we're looking to really advocate for an increase in the basic education funding, special education funding, as those are impacts for all of our school districts in Berks County, outside of those who may not receive those additional supplements through the adequacy or the tax equity dollars. So overall, I think the support of the community to use your voice in talking with our fantastic elected officials would be a great step moving forward in terms of building steam around the key areas we talked to in funding and where those dollars could be allocated.
This is some sort of personal experience, but I think it's very difficult to explain how these school funding formulas work. Because there's so many elements to it. There's the ability of the local school district, how much they're spending, what their enrollment are, the types of population that they're serving, those kinds of things. And I think all too often you bump into people making decisions along the way who don't understand and think that it's not a fair system because it's benefiting, a poor school district is getting more money from the state than a wealthier school district. How do you deal with that? How do you address that in a simple way? Because that's part of this conversation that needs to be had with legislators.
Yeah, and I think that's, Dave, I think that kind of surrounds all the things that we were just talking about was, number one, that remember the commission was put together to address the issue of the lawsuit. So and making sure that we are funding our schools equitably at that dollar amount. So that's the adequacy dollars, I think, in a tax equity are to help to smooth that out. Here's the problem though, and here's where we need to educate folks, is that that backfilling of dollars only works if you continue to fund the rest of our districts moving forward, because their costs are going up. Again, as I indicated, if you don't, what you're going to do is you're going to benefit some, and now you're going to upend others, right? So one of the factors that is always put into place, because we are a locally controlled state, that means that our districts are locally controlled and the state doesn't control us, is that some of our districts, obviously it's a whole lot more less state dollars based on the formulas. And again, the formulas are based on your per student account, on poverty indicators. They look at even sparsity, for like our small rural schools, particularly on the northern tier of Pennsylvania, where, it's 200 miles and you have 500, maybe 200 students are in that school district. It takes a lot of money to even get them there and such. So they put a sparsity number in there. But I think, to be honest with you, I think that's why it's really important that after we put a formula into place, that we review it, because, factors change. And sometimes when you put a formula together and you think you got it and you want to move forward on it, you find that you missed some based on some complex calculation. So that's the problem with the formulas when you're looking at 500 different districts. And I can tell you, I always say in Pennsylvania, if you know one district, you know one district. Because they all have different factors, right? And so it is a complex issue. And that's why, again, it's really important that at each region and location across the state, you're having a great relationship with your legislators and you're helping them to educate how the formula doesn't benefit your schools, so that we can encourage them sometimes to do the hard work of reopening that and adjusting that, so that we make sure that all our schools are funded in the best way possible from the state. But we know locally, right? Schools collect more taxes based on their tax base. There's some that can raise taxes to the index every year, and they get like $5,000 more dollars, and that's not exaggeration. But we have some others that may go raise it to the index, and they'll get $2 million more dollars from their communities. So that's also a part of, to be honest with you, the funding formulas is what your tax base is and what you get from taxes. And that's sometimes how districts fall behind, right? Because if you're that district that raises to the index and you only get, let's say, $20,000 more out of that, but your increase even in the retirement system was $100,000, you're $80,000 behind. And that means you have to cut programs because you don't have enough even if you raise the taxes. So what's the state going to give you to be able to help support you from cutting your programs for your students? It's really complex. That'll be another seminar if you want that one, but that's a big question.
And Michelle, do you want to do any final comments here?
So when I think of the equity lens and really those distribution of dollars, one of the things that we think about is what is the impact for students who potentially are in poverty or being under-resourced, and what is that greater impact on society as they're not receiving potentially the services they need or the quality education of somebody in a more fiscally sound district. So those adequacy dollars do really serve the community as a whole and society as a whole in terms of outcomes for students versus really just focusing in on students in specific districts based on where potentially the tax base for local taxes is highest. So try to think about it as a full society and each child and what their experiences are and how that really will impact us later on post that graduation time when they're skilled and able to join our workforce and be contributors to our society moving forward.
Well, I want to thank you both. It was a terrific show, a very challenging time, and I'm really interested and exciting to hear the things that you guys are working on, and the challenges it's going to pose for us if we are not successful in helping with this. So to everybody who joined us today and the people who are going to be watching this, please try to encourage people, legislators, public officials to provide the support that we need to make sure we have a strong, vibrant public school system in Pennsylvania. Thank you, Sherri. Thank you, Michelle. And we'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone.